Hi, everybody. So, my name is Mrs. Vasta, and I am going to be making some notes that go with task 9.1 for your Math 1 chapter. So, what I'd like to do is have you guys make sure you write all this stuff down in your packet, make sure you take really good notes. And our goal today is to do a couple different things. We are going to be talking about categorizing the different types of relationships that we observed both in class and in our experiments. The first thing we want to be able to do is interpret a correlation coefficient, which means we need to talk about two things. We need to talk about the strength of the relationship and the direction. Now, there are three different ways that data can be related to each other. The first way that data sets can be related is that they can have what's called a positive association. When there's a positive association, we would say that as the x variable increases, so whatever x stands for in this problem, then the y variable also increases. So y variable would be whatever the y stands for in this problem. So if you look at this graph, we can tell that this has a positive association because if you kind of imagine following this pattern, the graph is kind of going uphill as you go from left to right. So the graph is going uphill like this as a general pattern. Now, a negative association would mean that as the x variable increases, the y variable decreases. So if we look at this graph, this is sort of a different scenario where as we move from left to right, the values seem to be going downhill. When we say that there's no association, we're talking about no apparent relationship between the x and the y variable. So you'll notice that this graph seems to be kind of all over the place. There's not really a pattern that we can identify or we can see. Now, when we use words to describe these relationships, these are kind of the sentence frames we want you guys to use. So, if we notice that the graph is going uphill, it seems to have a positive association, we would say as the whatever the x variable stands for increases. And you'll notice that in both of these sentences, the x is always increasing. Then the y variable either increases or decreases. We would use increases for when these relationships have a positive association, and we would use decreases when it has a negative association. So let's practice this. For this problem, it looks like we're trying to find a relationship or determine if there is a relationship between the hours of cardio exercise and the risk of heart disease. Based on this graph, we want to choose whether the direction of the association is positive, negative, or none. If I kind of look at this graph, it looks to me like these points are generally following a downhill pattern. Given that that's the pattern that I see, I would say that this relationship has a negative association. Now, if I want to interpret what this means, we would say as the and we're going to fill in whatever the x variable is in this problem. In this problem, the x variable is the hours of cardio exercise. So as the hours of cardio exercise increases. So as we move to the right, as the hours of cardio exercise increases, then the y variable, the risk of heart disease, decreases. And we're going to choose decreases because this graph seems to be going downhill. So as the hours of cardio exercise increases, then the risk of heart disease decreases. If you think logically, this kind of makes sense. People who do more cardio exercise generally have a lower risk of heart disease. In the next problem, we're going to be looking to see if there's a relationship between the number of ticket writers for traffic tickets and the number of tickets that are actually issued. So if I hire more people to write tickets, do I actually give out more tickets? So if I look at the pattern in this graph, it seems like the pattern is generally following an uphill trend. So I would say that if I circle the direction of the association, I would go for positive. It's generally going uphill. Now, if I want to interpret this, then this means write a sentence. So just like before, we would start with the words as the, and then fill in the X variable. In this problem, the X variable is the number of ticket writers. So as the number of ticket writers increases, so as we move to the right, as we add more people to write tickets, then the Y variable, which in this case would be the number of tickets issued, would, in this case, since it's going uphill, would also increase. So as the number of tickets writers increases, the number of tickets issued increases, which makes sense. If you have more people looking for people to write tickets to, they're probably going to give out more tickets overall. A couple things that I want to make sure I really point out before this video is over. We always start with the words as the. We always start with the X variable, as the whatever the X variable is increases. Now, it doesn't matter whether your graph is going uphill or downhill, the X variable is always going to increase because as we read a graph, we always go from left to right. So the X's are increasing. Then then the Y variable, in this case, the number of tickets issued or the risk of heart disease, whatever the Y was, is either going to increase or decrease depending on the shape. So this is where we explain that it either goes downhill or uphill. All right, tomorrow we are going to practice writing a lot of these sentences ourselves. Sometimes I'm going to give you a fill in the blank, like I did here, and sometimes I'm going to make you write them from scratch. So it's really important to understand how these sentences are set up so we can practice those. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow for some practice.